Yo, Julius, it's your girl Raven Chapman, the Omen. Just want to give you a big shout out here from the UK. And Ring IQ, you're the man. Thanks so much for your support.
Welcome to the motherfucking relay. We're covering today's top boxing news. Ow!
Okay, we'll start with this. Per tweet from Michael Benson, Josh Taylor has now confirmed that he intends to rematch Jack Catterall next. I'm motivated for Jack, and that's all I'm thinking about. I don't have to do it, but I want to. I've done everything within my power to make it happen, so it's over to him now.
This is arguably a bigger fight than the Zapata fight would have been.
Don't misunderstand me. I think Josh Taylor versus Jose Zapata would have been a great fight. Both guys are very formidable, two of the very best at this weight, but in terms of scale, size, marquee value, and demand, I'd wager there's more demand for Taylor versus Catterall 2 in the United Kingdom than there would have been for Taylor versus Zapata in the United States or the United Kingdom. Jose Zapata, he isn't a well-known guy in the UK.
He is a bit more well-known in the US.
Although not so well-known that fighting him in the United States gets Josh the same money he could get fighting Jack Catterall for a second time in the United Kingdom. Overall, due to the controversy from the first fight, Taylor versus Catterall is actually a bigger fight than Taylor versus Zapata would have been. Unless we forget, I don't think Josh Taylor can actually enter into the United States. I'd wager that Josh Taylor's name is one of the 600 names, one of the 600 individuals that are not allowed to enter into the United States due to tenuous connections with Irish crime boss Daniel Kinahan. Call me crazy, but I think those two situations are interconnected.
I don't think Josh would have been able to come here to fight Jose Zapata anyway, and Jose going over there.
Well, him going over there doesn't make for a big fight. Taking on Jack Catterall for a second time does, due to the controversy from the first fight. This rematch,
It reminds me of Charlo versus Castaño 1 and 2.
it reminds me of that sequence of fights because in this fight, much like in that fight, I favor the guy that arguably lost to win the rematch.
A lot of people felt Jermel Charlo actually lost that fight, that it wasn't a draw.
And a lot of people feel that Josh Taylor really lost that fight, that he didn't deserve the W. He didn't deserve that decision win over Jack Catterall. In this fight, much like in that fight, I favor the guy that perhaps got a gift to win a rematch due to the circumstances.
With Charlo, it was all about adjustments. I felt Brian Castaño, he's going to fight the exact same way in the second fight that he did in the first.
And that it would be Jermel Charlo that makes the necessary adjustments to seize the day, seize the W, and become his division's undisputed champion. With Josh Taylor, it's a little different. What a lot of people don't want to talk about is that initially, Taylor versus Catterall was postponed due to Josh Taylor suffering a knee injury. Going into that fight with Jack Catterall, I don't think he was 100%. And while that's not an excuse, while I do feel that Jack Catterall did enough to deserve a decision, that has absolutely nothing to do with the second fight and what's going to happen.
I think Josh is going to knock him out.
I don't know where it's going to go down, though I don't get the sense it's going to take place in Josh Taylor's neck of the woods the way the first fight did. If Josh Taylor's intention is to silence the critics, then the suitable location for that fight, that rematch, would be in Jack Catterall's neck of the woods. That's the way that cookie breaks down, though all the same. I don't think Josh Taylor was 100% in that Jack Catterall fight. I think that injury to his knee affected his range of motion and his movement, and it's for that reason he struggled with Jack Catterall's jab. He struggled.
Josh Taylor's a guy, he normally throws leaping hooks, leaping uppercuts.
Well-timed ones that usually find a home, whereas in that Jack Catterall fight, forgive me for saying so, but something was wrong with that guy and his ability to move. I'd wager that knee injury hampered his movement, and I don't think he's going to have that problem in the second fight. Don't think he's going to have that problem in the rematch. Moreover, you see the sacrifices that he's made in order to do that second fight, to silence those critics. He's dropped 2 of the 4 alphabet titles he was in possession of, the WBA title and the WBC title.
He's doing what he's got to do for this rematch, and he likes his chances.
I do too. Forgive me for saying so, but Jack Catterall's not the first southpaw that Josh Taylor ever fought, or the first jabber. He struggled a bit with Victor Pistol, but he secured the W. Victor Pistol, who's a textbook boxer and a pretty decent jabber. He faced a southpaw like himself, a hard puncher in Regis Prograrius, a more dangerous opponent, I think, than Jack Catterall is. If Jack did anything...
Sorry to tell you this, but he happened to catch Josh at the most opportune time.
He really did. Jack Catterall, I'm sorry to say, at least in my eyes, He's not remarkable. What I saw was something was wrong with Josh, and Jack Catterall was a good enough boxer to capitalize off of that. But in a second fight, I don't think that's the way it's going to play out. I think we're going to get a better, more aggressive, more spiteful Josh Taylor that's going to go in there and knock Jack Catterall out, because Jack ain't the first southpaw that he's fought, and he ain't the first guy that's had a decent jab.
Because it needs to be reconciled.
I've got to try to wrap my mind around how is it that the same guy that beat O'Hara Davies and Victor Pistol manhandled Ryan Martin, unbeaten Ryan Martin, who was actually on performance-enhancing drugs in the fight. How is it that the same guy that beat Ivan Baranchik and Regis Prograrius, how is it he could go in there and look that way against this guy who hasn't fought anyone of note?
I think it boils down to timing.
I'm sorry to say, I think Jack Catterall's success in that first fight is largely due to timing. Catching Josh Taylor at the right time, at a time where he was coming right off a knee injury. And if that knee is up to scratch, if it's up to par, Jack Catterall's in a world of trouble. I think Josh Taylor's going to hurt that guy. And just in keeping with the theme of guys that are showing their mettle, showing their worth, and showing that they mean business, Eddie Hearn has revealed that he is talking to Sonny Edwards' team about making the unification fight with Julio Cesar Martinez. He said the fight could be made for October. For a long time now, Sonny Edwards has maintained that he wants that Julio Cesar Martinez fight. He wants to exact vengeance on Julio for what Julio did to his brother, Charlie Edwards. A lot of people. They don't really like Sonny Edwards' chances in that fight. Sonny Edwards is a cerebral...
He's a moving target. He's a stick-and-move outside jabber, a pure boxer.
Whereas Julio Cesar Martinez is your mid-range to inside pressure guy. Your mid-range to inside, according to Hoyle, Mexican pressure fighter. Stylistically, in this fight, Julio has the advantage.
But it won't be the first time that Sonny has faced a mid-range to inside pressure guy, a power guy.
To a lesser extent, a much lesser extent, he faced a guy like that not too long ago in Wasim Mohammed. He faced a guy like that, though Wasim Mohammed is not operating on the level of a Julio Cesar Martinez. You go back a little further, and Sonny Edwards actually won his IBF title from a mid-range to inside guy, a power guy in Mythilane.
Moruti Mythilane, the reigning IBF champion at that time.
A guy who was a cut above a Wasim Mohammed, though still an aging fighter, an aging champion. Moruti Mythilane, going into that Sonny Edwards fight, he was 38 years old. 38-year-old legs, trying to catch up to a very mobile and spry Sonny Edwards.
Sonny pitched a shutout in that fight. He was actually favored to lose with the bookies.
I think it flies under the radar a bit that Sonny Edwards was the betting underdog going into that Mythilane fight, in spite of Moruti Mythilane being 38 years old, an aging fighter, an aging champion. In that way, with Julio Cesar Martinez, Sonny Edwards won't be in unfamiliar territory. The difference is he's fighting a pressure guy who's in his prime, a young guy like he's a young guy.
With Muhammad Wasim, you're talking about a guy who had the right base style, though wasn't on the level.
You can have the right base style for the job and do some of the right things, though not all of them. And that's why a guy like Wasim Muhammad, he fell short of the mark. Moruti Mythilane, a guy a cut above a Wasim Muhammad, good fighter, solid champion, certainly more solid than Mohammed Wasim, but an aging fighter, an aging champion. Those 38-year-old legs trying to catch up to a 25-year-old Sonny Edwards.
That won't be the situation. That won't be the case with Julio Cesar Martinez.
Julio's got the right base style for the job, and he's more or less on the level, or at least a level above a Wasim Muhammad, and he's not well past his prime like Moruti Mythilane, and he has the right base style for the job. So this is a more dangerous fight for Sonny than any of those fights were, though Sonny has been insistent that he wants that fight with Julio. He's not shying away from that fight. He's running to it, and time has proven him a man of his word.
Very recently, Sonny said that he was in talks for a unification match.
And because reports indicated that the Julio Cesar Martinez versus McWilliams Arroyo fight was being rescheduled, I figured that maybe Sonny was talking about unifying with Artem Delakian, this division's reigning WBA champion. Apparently not. Apparently, he was talking about Julio.
Which I guess, in order to do this fight between Julio and Sonny, they're going to have to pay McWilliams Arroyo to step aside.
Martinez versus Arroyo was supposed to go down on the undercard of Rodriguez versus Rumvisai, and that didn't happen because for the third time...
The fight ended up getting postponed for the third time because something was wrong with Julio.
I can only deduce that sorting out that situation with McWilliams Arroyo, sorting him out, that's got to be a part of this situation. That's got to be a part of this this deal. Maybe they're paying that guy to step aside to allow this fight, which is a bigger and better fight, to take place. I very much like the idea of Martinez versus Edwards. I think most people, they are going to favor Julio Cesar Martinez to win this thing because he's going to have the youth that Muruthi Mithilain didn't have. Similar base style, similar sweet spot, mid-range to inside, but a fresher, younger guy. Fresher set of legs, fresher set of reflexes, and more explosivity. Perhaps even more punching power.
Julio's coming off that one-sided decision loss to Chocolatito.
But I wouldn't read too much into that if this fight gets made, because Sonny Edwards and Chocolatito, Roman Gonzalez, they're very different fighters that go about fighting a fight in very different ways. Chocolatito, like Julio, he's a mid-range to inside fighter. He's just better at it than Julio. He's coming towards that guy, whereas Sonny's going to move lateral, use the ring, and stay on the perimeter of it. It's a very different fight between Sonny and Julio than what we saw between Julio and Roman.
Yeah, because Roman's a mid-range to inside fighter, and Sonny is an outside jabber, stick and mover.
Does Sonny Edwards have what it takes to keep Julio Cesar Martinez off of him whilst fighting on the balls of his feet, sticking and moving for the full course? The full 12 rounds? That's the question. It's a very intriguing fight that has its own backstory. Let's see if Eddie can't get this fight over the line. Just in keeping with the theme of news at or around these weights, per a tweet from Michael Benson, Eddie Hearn has said they might make Jesse Bam Rodriguez versus Roman Chocolatito Gonzalez for December. You know, initially, they were saying they were going to do the Estrada versus Gonzalez trilogy later on in the fall or winter months. Are they now deviating from that plan? I don't mind either fight. I don't mind either outcome, though this does go against what Robert Garcia, who trains Bam Rodriguez, this does go against what he said, that he wants Bam to move down. He wants him to move down to flyweight, 112 pounds, where Sonny Edwards holds the IBF, Julio Cesar Martinez holds the WBC, Junto Nakatani, he's got the WBO, and Artem Delakian, he's got the WBA.
This goes against what Robert Garcia indicated he wants for Bam. He wants Bam to move down from super flyweight.
Chocolatito, he's a living legend, arguably the very best fighter, if not the best fighter, in the entire super flyweight division. In his last fight, he took a young guy,
Martinez.
Julio Cesar Martinez, to school. A young, ambitious guy, the same way that Bam Rodriguez is a young, ambitious guy. A young, ambitious guy who in his last two fights took out two of the four kings in the super flyweight division, Carlos Cuadras and Sor Rungvisai, who he knocked out, who he stopped.
But at the same time, you have to consider that Chocolatito's in a better place in his career than Carlos Cuadras was.
And Sor Rungvisai. Chocolatito, unlike those fighters, he turned back the clock, turned back the hands of time in his last fight with a very ambitious Julio Cesar Martinez, who was thoroughly outclassed, round after round, by Roman Gonzalez. Bam Rodriguez, comparatively, he's a bit harder to read. Much better feet than a Julio Cesar Martinez. He's a heavy-handed puncher, Julio, don't get me wrong, but he's a
mid-range to inside guy, but so's Chocolatito. He's just not better at it than Chocolatito.
There's really nothing subtle about Julio Cesar Martinez. He looks to overwhelm his opponents with power and volume, but he's a pretty predictable guy after a while, at least to a seasoned veteran like Roman Gonzalez, whereas Bam Rodriguez, bit more finesse with this kid.
Bam's greatest weapon in this fight against Chocolatito would be his feet.
That needs a southpaw. He's not just going to sit there mid-range to inside with any mid-range to inside fighter. He's going to cut angles.
You hear a lot about his punching power, his combinations, but what makes Bam a really special fighter are his feet.
There's a lot of volume punchers at super flyweight, a lot of respectable punchers with respectable power, but Bam Rodriguez is a cut above those fighters because he's got great feet, great footwork, coupled with him being a southpaw.
Now, I won't tolerate any Chocolatito slander any more than you would, but you have to admit,
Bam's legs, Bam's feet, pose a very credible, near and apparent threat to Chocolatito, who's 35 years old and he's not getting any younger, he's not getting any faster. You know what they say, a fighter's power, that's the last thing to go, but a fighter's legs are the first.
and with the way that Bam Rodriguez cuts angles out of the southpaw stance, he could give Chocolatito a lot of problems.
Let's see if Eddie can't get this fight over the line as well. Finally, just in keeping with the theme of all things Matchroom, not so much the zone, per a tweet from Michael Benson, the Alexander Usyk versus Anthony Joshua rematch will reportedly be shown live on Sky Sports pay-per-view in the United Kingdom, as Sky have beaten out the zone to win the broadcast rights. AJ recently signed a long-term deal with the zone, but the Usyk rematch was separate, and this This isn't a good look for DAZN. We know that DAZN is trying to crack into the UK market, trying to appeal to those fans, and them not broadcasting this fight, it's a loss for them. It's not a good look. You know, the real value of Anthony Joshua's deal, the newly signed deal with DAZN, where he boxes there exclusively, the real value of that fight doesn't even come into it unless he beats Alexander Usyk.
Then why did they bother to announce it if it doesn't go into effect until after this fight?
I'd wager it was in order to dissuade any potential suitors, anyone who might want to bid on this fight, in order to get them to tell themselves, well, you know, we ain't got Anthony Joshua under contract. He wins this thing, and it's not like he's going to box on our network, so why spend an arm and a leg to get the rights to this thing? Anyway, I'd wager they announced that news preemptively as a deterrent to perhaps dissuade a Sky Sports, for example, from bidding on the fight. But I guess it didn't work.
My initial assumption seems to have checked out. The Saudis are auctioning off the rights to this fight. And the question now
is this going to be worldwide? Are they also auctioning off the rights to the fight here in the United States, or can we expect to see it as part of our DAZN subscription? Is it going to be a situation where DAZN shows the fight, or are they still auctioning off the rights to where, I don't know, maybe an ESPN or a Showtime might want to bid?
This isn't necessarily a loss for Matchroom, but it is a loss for DAZN.
A good chunk of the money this fight is going to generate commercially is going to be right over there in the United Kingdom, where Anthony Joshua's core supporters are. That's likely where the most money is going to be made from this fight commercially. And, you know, they're not showing it. What about here in America? What about here in the United States? It seems like a loss. Doesn't have to be a complete loss. If DAZN still has the U.S. broadcast rights and the rights up there in Canada, several other territories.
It can still be a very lucrative situation for them. It all depends on whether or not they're showing the fight in certain territories.
Could be a situation to where a boxing fan that may not already be a DAZN subscriber may so decide to subscribe to DAZN in order to see this fight, provided that DAZN is showing it in their territory. That has yet to be determined, though it is surprising. This is a loss for DAZN in many ways. Whether or not it's a complete loss is now the question.
It's not a loss for Matchroom because it's Matchroom that sold the rights to the fight to the Saudis.
They've made their money because they're the ones that sold the Saudis the rights to that fight. And it's now the Saudis auctioning off those rights. It appears that Sky Sports still wants to be in the Anthony Joshua business, even if it is just for one fight.
Yeah, one fight, but it's the most important fight of his career.
It's not a loss for Matchroom. It really isn't. They're the ones who sold the rights to the fight to the Saudis, though it's bad optics for Matchroom, who works exclusively with DAZN. You would have thought that DAZN would have the inside track for this fight, that they'd get the rights for it.
Because they work so closely with Matchroom, so closely with Eddie.
Eddie auctioned off those rights to the Saudis, and the Saudis are now auctioning off those rights to Sky. That's the way the cookie crumbled.
Matchroom made their money, but DAZN got the short end of the stick.